Hey everyone, it is the 2nd of May 2021, and this is our Sunday morning class on the I Ams of Jesus. And I do want to mention something that is going to affect everybody in class here who watches these videos on the YouTube channel, and that is that I am going to be teaching back in the auditorium starting, I believe it's May 23rd. So we've just got maybe, a couple more weeks after this before I go back into the auditorium class, and then you'll be able to find you'll be able to find my class in the auditorium on the YouTube channel where you would normally find the sermon. Okay, so I believe this is right. If it's not, I'll make a correction next week. But my class and the worship service will both be in the same place, so you won't have to bounce around and find that, and you'll be able to get that all in one shot. All right, so we'll be doing that as we're kind of slowly opening back up again. My videos here are going to pretty much be done with here by the end of May. So it's been a really interesting year or so, I guess, if interesting is the way that you could put that, for COVID and everything that it was able to do in our world, and all the changes that it made. But I've appreciated being able to do this, and hope that you guys have gotten some benefit from the classes that I've put out. But we'll be going back into the auditorium class. Now, in those cases, what you'll find is, of course, it'll pick up the speaker. It probably will not get people asking questions in class. I'll try to remember to do a good job of repeating those questions so that you don't miss out on anything. Or just come on to worship. If you've had the vaccination or you feel comfortable doing so, we would love to see you in worship. There's just nothing like seeing people in person, and we'd love to see you there. Well, this morning we're going to be talking about continuing to talk about the I Ams of Jesus, and today we're going to talk about the sheep gate. And this is one of those statements that we need to have a little bit of context in order to understand, because it's something that is a little bit unusual, and is something that we need to understand because we don't have any kind of parallel to it. So, when we think of shepherding today, or maybe being on a farm or a ranch, we think of, large spaces, and I'm not a rancher, so I'm not probably not going to describe it accurately. But from what I've seen, you see large open spaces with fencing, right? Well, that's not really what happened in the ancient world. That's just not, they didn't have that. And so when they would bring sheep in at night, they would have these sort of spaces with walls, with these low-lying walls that the sheep couldn't get over, and they would kind of herd them into this little pen, and the door is actually the shepherd himself. The shepherd would lie at the entrance to this pen, and the shepherd himself would be the door. Okay, now that will make sense when we read what John has to say about this. Okay, so in John chapter 10, Jesus says, truly, starting in verse 7, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd." Okay, well, that's getting into the next one. But this statement here in this just brief, what is that, 3, 4, or 5 verses that talks about Jesus being the door. Okay, well, we might think of that, in sort of an abstract way, right? Jesus talks about himself being the way, the truth, and the life, and the good shepherd, and the vine, and other metaphors like that. Okay, well, he's the door. Okay, I get it. Jesus is the door that opens up into eternity, right? That's kind of how I think some of us sort of look at it. But what Jesus is saying, he's actually using an image that people would have understood back in the first century, back in this time period. And so when he says, I am the door of the sheep, he's actually, yes, he's using an image, right? He's using an image. But he also means it actually a little more literally than we might assume at first. Because like I said, shepherds would herd the sheep into this pen, and then there would be this wall, and then the doorway, and it was just open. No door, no closure, right? Nothing to lock. But the shepherd himself would sleep at the opening. And so, therefore, you wouldn't have things wandering in, you wouldn't have sheep wandering out, right? And so, literally, the shepherd was the doorway. He was taking up the doorway, that space, all right? And so that's what Jesus is talking about here. Now, it's in a section where he talks about being the sheep gate and the good shepherd. So these images really kind of fit together, right? And that was important in the ancient world because, herding and raising livestock was still a very, very big deal. Judea had sort of an agricultural economy, right? Very agrarian. And so livestock was very, very important. You may recall the story of Job, right? Where Job has all this livestock, and he's said to be, just incredibly wealthy. Well, his wealth was in livestock, right? That was one measure of a person's wealth in antiquity was how many animals did they have, right? And so this is something that was very, very important. Now, as far as this kind of this imagery goes. There are lots of Old Testament examples of this, right? David was a shepherd. You have kings of Israel and Judah were called, kings in the ancient world in general were called shepherds of their people, right? So you have these images that are sort of these long-standing images that people were familiar with and understood. And when Jesus says he is the shepherd, immediately they had ideas that would have sprung to mind. And of course, there is that sort of that kingly association, right? Kings were shepherds of their people. Guess what? Jesus is shepherd of his people, but guess what? He's also a king, right? And so there's a lot of this stuff, this multi-layers of stuff that are going on in understanding Jesus' identity and just exactly what he was claiming in the first century, because he made some pretty stupendous claims. And, today, and this is something we'll talk about in the sermon, but, today people look at Jesus and they just want to take what they want to take. Jesus was, a good moral teacher. I'll take Jesus as a good moral teacher. Well, Jesus was kind of like a Jewish philosopher. Well, I'm kind of into philosophy. Hey, I'll take that, right? But the moment it comes down to Jesus being your Lord, hey, hold on a second. I'm not sure if I'm in for that, right? Hold up. And so people take what they want out of Jesus. But the thing is, you have to take the whole package. If you like Jesus' teachings, you can't just say, well, I'm going to pick and choose his teachings. I like this stuff about loving your neighbor, right? That sounds good. Loving your enemy, well, that's tough, but I can understand how that could help make a better world. Hey, let's do it. Oh, but he's also the Lord. and master of my life. Well, that challenges me, and so I'm not so sure I want to do that. Right? That's kind of how people sort of respond to Jesus in those ways. And again, we're going to talk about that in the morning sermon, about what that means, because if you like Jesus' teachings, you have to take all of them. Right? If you think Jesus is a good guy, you have to take everything that he said. You have to take everything that he was and everything that he is. You can't just say, hey, I like my version of Jesus. I'm going to take the Bible and snip, some of this, all this miracles and, this stuff about him being Lord of Lords and King of Kings and all this other. I'm just going to snip all that out and take the Jesus that I want. No, that's not how it works. You don't get to do that. That's not, that's thoroughly inappropriate, right? So you have to take everything. Whatever Jesus says, you have to take that. If you're going to recognize him as an authority, you have to recognize his authority, right? And so a lot of these things that Jesus says in his time on earth actually sort of feed into that. Even down to him using this imagery of being like associated with sheep. Yeah, that had kingly associations with it. And people in the ancient world would have understood that. That's just simply was part of their world. Maybe in a way that is not part of ours. And maybe that helps us to have this kind of buffet style of looking at Jesus, where, I like his morals. I like some of his ethics. I kind of like who he was as a person. Hey, I really liked it when he got on top of the authorities, right, and gigged them for being jerks. But I don't want everything. It's like, you go to a restaurant. You don't want everything. You just want what you like, right? So you get your salad and you get your baked chicken and you get your corn and you get your dessert and you get all your, whatever that happens to be. You get your favorite things. And then you go and you eat, right? Well, you can't do that with Jesus. You have to take everything. You can't just take what you like. And so Jesus, the images that he uses kind of feed into this understanding. He is your shepherd. Yeah, he's going to go rescue that sheep, but he's also going to give you instructions. He also has authority, because that shepherd imagery, guess what? That also feeds into kingly imagery. And so that means he's not just your shepherd, he's also your monarch. He's also your king. And so we have to take all of Jesus, not just part of him or the parts that we want. Well, when Jesus is using this imagery of the sheepfold, it's actually pretty comforting, I think, because it has with it essentially this element of protection, right? So sheep are not intelligent animals. They often kind of do dumb things, and no offense by saying that. It's just, there are some animals that are smarter than others. And, it makes kind of an appropriate image for us, because how many times do we do something foolish and we say, how could I have been so dumb? Right? How could I have possibly thought this was a good idea when I was doing it at the time? And so, we have to kind of look at ourselves and laugh at ourselves a little bit when we look at Jesus' imagery of applying the idea of a sheep to one of his followers. So there is that, and I don't mean any disrespect to sheep, right? I had a preacher got really upset with me one time when I said this. I made a comment in a sermon about how I had an Australian friend who came to the States, and my friend was a very kind of carefree individual. Didn't really have a developed sense of responsibility or maturity. And so he kind of clowned around in school a lot. In fact, we called him Rowan Clown, because his name was Rowan Crown. But we called him Rowan Clown because that was kind of his personality, and it took him a while. It took him coming to America to kind of grow up a little bit. And he said when he was in school, there is a test that Australians take. And depending on how you score on this test, it kind of determines what jobs that you're eligible for. in the workforce, right? It's not like America where you go out and you just say, hey, well, I'd like to try my hand at this, or I'd like to try my hand at that. It's in Australia, you take a test, and depending on how you score, if you don't score very high, that limits where you can go in terms of what you can do. And so he came to America to study because that test basically ruled him out of doing any kind of graduate study there in Australia. So he had to come to America to do it. Well, he came to America and said that the highest score that he made on the test basically made him eligible to be a sheep breeder. And he said that he had I want to say maybe an uncle, some kind of relative, who had a sheep farm in Australia. And he said, man, sheep are so dumb. And, I told that story in this sermon, and this preacher went bananas. I mean, went berserk on me and his wife. And how dare you say that sheep are dumb animals? And then because they had raised sheep and they really liked sheep for some reason. I guess I don't know. I don't understand why they were so upset because what I said was true. And then they went and told me a story about how dumb sheep were, all the while criticizing me for saying so. So, whatever. The point of the story is, you look at sheep and they're not bright animals. And the shepherd, when he sleeps across the entrance of the sheep gate, what it does is it kind of keeps them in. It gives them a feeling of protection. Kind of keeps them kind of herded into this little confined area. It of course, demonstrates concern. The shepherd's not going to let them wander out. It's not going to let a predator come in. He's there to defend them, right? And so this image really is one that's extremely comforting, because what it does is it tells us as Christians, when Jesus says, "I am the door to the sheep," that's our door, isn't it? We're his sheep. He's our door. Of course, other things, shepherd and all that, but he's our protection, right? He's going to help us feel safe. He's going to help us feel guarded. He's not going to let predators come in, right? And so you look at that kind of imagery, and it's really, really encouraging, really, really fascinating. So neat that Jesus thought to use this image, right? It's so cool that he thought to use this as something to demonstrate his concern for us. Of course, there are a lot of things that we'll get into about the shepherd, and we'll talk about some more things next week. But there are a lot of things a shepherd did to show concern for the sheep. But this is just one of those things, right? That is magnificent. But there's also the fact that when you look at this image and you kind of examine it, well, there's only one door, right? There's only one door to that pen. There's only one pen where the sheep are. And there's only one door. And in order to get inside, the shepherd has to allow you inside. Right? He has to allow you to do that. He has to welcome you in as part of his flock. If you're not part of his flock, you don't get entrance, right? You're not permitted entry. And so it's comforting on one hand to know that, hey, shepherd's laying at the door. He's protecting us. But on the other hand, it's also something that's a little bit of a warning, because, not just any sheep gets to wander into the shepherd's fold, right? Not any sheep just gets entrance. The shepherd's lying there, and you can't get in unless you go past him, and he is going to be your door, right? And so we have to understand that this is not just something that's comforting for Christians. It's also something that, we see it with a sense of responsibility, because we have to gain, if we're going to enjoy the benefits of being in that shepherd's flock, then we have to gain entrance to his flock. We have to gain entrance to the sheepfold. And the only way we do that is if he allows us, right? And so we don't just come up and say, hey, you're going to let me in. I'm going to barge my way in. I'm going to force my way in. You need to let me in because I've got all this other stuff that I can give to you. There are good reasons why you should permit me to enter. It's his decision, right? And of course, when we look at the New Testament, it's very clear that God has laid down the blueprint for exactly who makes up his people. And if we're not part of that group, if we're not willing to follow that blueprint, we're not going to be able to gain access to that status as belonging to God and belonging to the sheepfold of his Son, who is the sheep gate and the good shepherd, right? So it's an interesting image. It only appears very briefly. As far as I know, I think this is the only time it ever appears in the New Testament. I think. I hope I'm not wrong about that, but I think this is the only time it appears. Only just in a handful of verses. But what a neat image it is, right? So it's very, very cool. But anyway, that's our class for this morning. If we're going to see you in morning worship, love to see you. If you're still kind of taking things gingerly and cautiously before coming back, that's fine. If you have some kind of concern that is weighing on you about being back around a number of people, and we're still getting people with vaccinations. There's still a lot of people who don't have that, and so I know there's some of us who do have concerns and who are still being a little cautious in getting back in. But wherever you may be, we just want to say we are always praying for you, always thinking about you. And if we'll see you this morning, we'll love to see you then. If it happens to be sometime in the near future, well, we'll be looking for you. So I hope you're having a wonderful morning already. I hope this is a wonderful Lord's Day for you. And we will see you next time.